In our second segment this week, Arthur Coldwells chats with the thoughtful and brilliant motorcycle designer JT Nesbitt of Bienville Studios in New Orleans. Actually, JT is the designer of the Wraith, the premier edition cover bike of Rob Report Motorcycling magazine back in 2004. JT's latest project is the exquisite-looking Magnolia 4. It's a breathtakingly beautiful, retro-styled inline 4 motorcycle. Check out Bienville Studios for pictures and more information on the design journey that JT and his team have been on for the last few years. It's been a long time since you and I have seen each other.
My goodness, has it ever been?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think my last real memory of you was two or three of us standing in the middle of the Bonneville Salt Flats at dawn, outside with you pulling out of a van the Confederate Wraith and a pair of beaten up old bagpipes, which you then decided to play Amazing Grace on. It was awesome.
Well, you may disagree with the methods, but don't disagree with the outcome. I mean, we had a lot of fun that meeting. Conditions were terrible, but we were on an untested prototype motorcycle, piloted bravely by Chris Roberts.
Yes.
It was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful event.
It really was. It really was. It was so unexpected that you guys decided to do that. And it was great. I think you guys acquitted yourselves well. The Confederate Wraith was a really interesting machine. And really, I mean, just to sort of go back to your history of things, you really were the designer of that bike, weren't you? And several other Confederates as well. I think are they now called Curtis, I think?
Yeah, well, the story really starts. My history with motorcycle design with the G2 Hellcat, and the follow-up to that bike was the Wraith, and that's where I found Brian Case.
Yes.
So Brian Case, who's now the director of the Barber Museum, got his start in motorcycling uh, because I met this kid at a design conference. Yeah, a lot of history there, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny how all these relationships are intertwined when it comes to our shared passion.
Yeah, that's very true. I remember you showing me the design concept of the Wraith, and it's interesting that this conversation has come full circle, because that really was the sort of genesis behind your designs, was this circular concept. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's some basic archetypes in motorcycling. You have the American line, the European line, and variations of those two, different versions of that become the Japanese line once they found their own design language. And the Wraith was a complete departure, and that's one of the reasons why it was so impactful, is that it didn't share any of those commonalities. It is its own category.
Very true.
So the circles and lines were a hieroglyph to be able to describe an all new design category.
Yes.
So when in 2003 or 2004, when I pulled up to your studio when you were doing Rob Report, and and I unloaded this claptrap concept vehicle that me and the guys in the back of the shop had put together in our spare time. I remember you took one look at that and you said, "Oh, I don't know about this." You were like, you were freaking out, man, because it was rough as a cob. That thing was never supposed to really be a motorcycle. It was just a piece of sculpture. But I got to commend you for seeing something in that rough thing that we cobbled together and something in me that really launched my career. That cover of the inaugural Rob Report Ultimate Motorcycle, the title of that, we got the cover. It was red. I don't know if you remember it.
Oh, I remember it very well.
It was your launch edition,
Yeah.
and the copy was design driven.
Yes.
And that is something that those are your words, but they became my mantra.
Interesting.
Thank you very much for that guidance for my entire life.
Oh, you're so welcome, and I thank you for giving me, some credit. But the truth of it is it.
Well, you took a huge risk. I don't know if you remember, but man, when we wheeled that thing out of the van and put it in the middle of your studio, you were like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do with this hunk of junk?" And then Ultan Guilfoyle actually wrote the copy for the article, and Ultan was like, "Man, I don't know if I can even write this story."
It wasn't a heap of junk. It was not. You're being way too self-effacing for that. It was not a heap of junk. The thing that struck me right from the first moment we talked about it and up until you brought it out of the van was just how different it was. It was so different. And as you say, it completely defied any category. So I didn't look at it and think, wow, what a piece of junk. I was just, I was impressed in a lot of ways and panicking in a couple of other ways. But
Yeah. Well, what I saw was the panic, and and that's okay, man. It all worked out. I mean, I think that magazine, if I remember correctly, flew off of the newsstand.
it did. And it achieved exactly what I wanted. I wanted, I mean, just for our listeners, my thinking at the time was I wanted something on the cover that would make people stop and say, what the heck is that thing? And it achieved that. It absolutely achieved that. And it had that effect on me when you rolled it out of the van. And but it culminated, as you said, it culminated at the Bonneville Salt Flats. I mean, not culminated, but culminated for me at the Bonneville Salt Flats, which was absolute proof of concept. I mean, it went well. It was a real machine. It worked. It ran. It was really very interesting.
It became a real machine, and the only reason why it became a real machine because Matt Chambers, wonderful man that he is, decided to turn me loose and let me do it. And
Right.
I had secretly been working with Brian Case, this kid again, who later went on to do amazing work. He was the designer at Motos as well.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm still friends with Brian Case. And in fact, I'm headed back to the Barber Vintage Fest next month. And I'll see Brian again. And, we look back on those times very favorably. And we've definitely had a good laugh, catching up about that stuff. So anyway, so that was really the sort of the background of our meeting. But you've recently sort of crossed my radar again with this new Magnolia idea. And you were kind enough to send me your creative brief. And typical JT, it's a little bit out there, but also rooted in history and different and just interesting. It's fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, the Magnolia 4 project, and it's called the Magnolia 4 because it's a four-cylinder.
Sure.
In 1999, when I was first hired by Matt Chambers, I did three sketches. I sketched the G2 Hellcat, which was supposed to be a muscular, cruiserish, but a little bit of Street Fighter influence, which was really fresh at the time.
That was a great bite.
I sketched out the Wraith and a four-cylinder motorcycle. And I've been obsessively drawing this motorcycle for the past 25 some odd years. I would like to direct your listeners if they're curious about the history of the development of these projects, to go to my website, bienvillestudios.com. That's bienvillestudios.com. And in a section called The Journey on that website, I have all of the original concept drawings and all of the press. So the Rob Report motorcycling magazine that we're talking about is actually on the website. I took the time to scan all of that old stuff and put it up. My website is 172 pages. So if you're ready to go and spend a couple hours, and it will take a couple hours to go through it thoroughly. Pour yourself a glass of whiskey, light up a cigar, take your time.
So I guess my first question is how close is Magnolia 4 to production or to creation? Does a prototype exist, and is there any production envisaged for it?
Well, I got serious about actually building a solid model, which is CAD, computer assisted design.
Sure.
A little over a year ago. And we have been working, I say we, the we is actually a man named Jeff Sperry. So I hired Jeff Sperry, and he moved from Michigan, from Detroit to New Orleans to work one-on-one with me here in the studio to flesh out these concepts. We're at a year and 2 months, and our solid model is looking pretty good. I do have some other people who are interested in this machine, and you can see what we've come up with on the website. How serious am I about this project? I think that was the original question. My answer is I'm all in. This is the culmination of 25 years worth of research and learning and personal growth. The guy that's sitting across from me right now, Jeff Sperry, he's the guy who was a big part of the Motus engine development program.
Oh, interesting.
So that's how I found Jeff, is through Lee Kahn, who is the former CEO of Motus.
Right.
So these aren't spring chickens down here noodling around with goofy art projects. This is some serious engineering that's going on here in the studio. And we've had to design everything. Like, this is fresh. Everything is purpose built for this machine.
It's obviously a very, a sort of somewhat of a retro looking machine, and the inline 4-cylinder mounted longitudinally in the chassis. In other words, not sideways like the sort of the Japanese motorcycles, but from end to end is very interesting. And even just looking at the creative brief, there's some really interesting ideas in there. An adjustable crankshaft and twin contra-rotating flywheels. Can you tell me a little bit about the engine side of things and what's going on there?
Sure. And for your listeners, the design brief, I have hard copies, but it's also available for download on my website, the entire design brief. What really separates the men from the boys is caring enough about your project to write it down. So before I hired Jeff, before we started really finalizing these concepts, I wrote the whole thing down. And it's so important to do a design brief. I mean, it's an internal document primarily. And things, as you move along, sometimes change. But you write a design brief as a guide, so that as you get deeper and deeper into a project, you can always reference that design brief. That being said, the engine. Well, let's back up just a second. Let's talk about why. Why are we building an inline American 4-cylinder? The reason is fairly simple. It's because no one's done this in 82 years. And the greatest of all American motorcycle design languages is a four-cylinder. It is not a V-twin. So if you know your motorcycle history, what you'll notice is that American motorcycle companies built singles for, I would say, basic transportation and some competition, lightweight competition. They built V-twins for touring and certainly competition with the V-twins, but it's sort of a more of a universal kind of do-it-all type motorcycle, a V-twin. The pinnacle of that hierarchy has always been the four-cylinder. The greatest American motorcycle has always been the four, not the twin. So to some extent, I'm just kind of tired of seeing this void. Why hasn't anyone built a four-cylinder if it's, as I believe, the greatest design language? So in some ways, this project is very clever because we're choosing a niche that's totally unfilled. If you look at John Britton and John Britton's story,
Yeah.
it's a myth that John Britton built a world-beating racing motorcycle. He built a Ducati-beating racing motorcycle because he was smart. He didn't go after Honda and Kawasaki and Yamaha and Suzuki. He didn't go into the schoolyard and pick the biggest kid to try and fight. He picked the smallest kid to try and tussle with. That was one of his many geniuses was to find your niche. And this motorcycle, I'm stunned and can't believe that no one has attempted this since 1942. One of the difficulties to overcome with this style of engine is heat.
Right.
Because the Japanese style of inline four, it's actually patterned on a Gilera. Gilera was the first company to build an inline four, successful inline four that's transverse. And facing your exhaust ports into the oncoming wind is a really good idea. But everybody already knows how to do that, and other people do that better than I ever could. The issue of heat, overcoming heat, what we've done is very clever. We've created a liquid-cooled engine, but the liquid happens to be engine oil. The passageways for our oil and the way that our oiling system works is entirely unique. We've got under piston oil squirters and lots of drills and passageways in the head. And we actually have pockets in the head where we can get oil to have dwell time in the cylinder itself so that it can absorb heat. In other words, we have pockets that we can adjust the level of with adjustable jets so that at operating RPM, full operating RPM, we have a level of oil in the head absorbing heat and then transferring that heat actually into the transmission case. The reason why we're doing an adjustable crankshaft is that multiple part crankshafts actually work really well. This is old tech stuff. And if you design your crankshaft to have multiple locations, you can very easily, because we have a single overhead cam, reconfigure the engine to run either flat plane or cross plane. Now, interestingly, flat plane four cylinders, there's only basically one style where 1 and 4 come to TDC at the same time, and then 2 and 3 come to TDC at the same time. But that's not all there is. There's actually 16 combinations of just a flat plane.
Right.
So you can have 1 and 2 come to TDC, and then 3 and 4 come to TDC, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Being able to build a cross-plane four-cylinder, which is one of the things that makes the new generation of Yamaha R1s such wonderful motorcycles, delivers torque because you have an uneven firing order. So the firing order becomes 1, 4, pause, 2, 3, 1, 4, pause, 2, 3, 1, 4. So that uneven firing order, we want to be able to take advantage of that. But it may work out that a flat plane design is better.
Right.
Building a multiple part crankshaft allows you to build many different configurations and test them. And we may find that a flat plane, conventionally firing flat plane, works great, but might not make a lot of torque.
Right.
And our cross plane engine might make a ton of torque, but it vibrates a little bit more. So there may be the ability to customize the engine for different applications. It opens up a lot.
Yes, that's very interesting. I can definitely see that. Based on the sort of the style of the motorcycle, this is probably going to be more of a torque type of inspiration rather than more of a screamer type of motor.
It's built to fulfill a fantasy. And the fantasy for all Americans, really all American motorcyclists, is to go long distance touring through America.
Yeah.
I mean that's what my fantasy is, to go on a tour, to ride through the desert, to ride to Southern California, to ride through the swamps of Louisiana, to ride through the hills and the mountains on the East Coast. I mean, that's us. That's what Americans fantasize about. At least this America.
Yeah, probably not every single American, but certainly, anyone who rides a motorcycle, the idea of being able to travel around this amazing country on a motorcycle is something that I would imagine most motorcycle riders would jump at if they had the chance. And a lot of people make that chance. Yeah.
And to do it on the great American motorcycle.
Yeah, for sure. You only have to look at the numbers that go to Sturgis every year to realize, and a lot of those people ride there. And once they get there, the riding is absolutely spectacular around the Black Hills. So yeah, I would say, riding a great American motorcycle around the great American locales is yes, of course, it's every rider's ideal. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
And to accomplish that, you don't need tons of horsepower.
No.
So why would we play that game? What we're looking for is torque.
Right.
So our benchmark is 100 foot-pounds of torque and 85 horsepower. What else do you need to accomplish that goal? Well, there's one other thing, and that's reliability. And reliability goes hand in hand with simplicity. So we've specified the absolute fewest number of moving parts possible.
And you've also gone for things like gear-driven cams, I see.
That's why we have a gear-driven camshaft. So if you have a chain-driven cam, I count every link in that chain as a moving part.
So moving along to, for instance, the transmission as part of the drivetrain. What's your thinking there?
Well, interestingly, the design of the engine is in many ways easier than the design of the transmission, because it's basically a repetition of one part. You just do it 4 times.
Right.
The transmission, especially the case, has been bedeviling us for the past 2 months. It's really complicated. We're on the tail end of transmission case design, and inside that case is a 3-speed transmission. Now, interestingly, all the bikes that we're talking about, the bikes that I'm referencing, these wonderful American 4-cylinder motorcycles pre-war, they all ran 3-speed transmissions. They work fine. There are guys out there riding their 3-speed Indian 4s at interstate speeds as we speak.
Yep.
So carefully matching the ratios to the desired outcome becomes really important. But the advantage of the 3-speed is that it only has one shifter fork. So to go from complexity the complexity of a 3-speed to a 4-speed isn't 1/3 more complex. It's like 5 times more complex. Our transmission doesn't have a shifter drum or a shifter plate. It's a very simple fork, and it's a combination of sliding mesh and constant mesh designs. So second gear is sliding mesh. Again, we're not road racing. We got a bike that's making a ton of torque. Why would you need to be carrying around transmission gears that you don't need?
Yeah, absolutely.
My daily ride is a 1977 Harley Davidson Shovelhead FLH in vivid brown, and it's got the traditional Harley. Yeah, it's horrible. I love it so much. It's got the Harley 4-speed transmission. Now, how often do I use third gear? Almost never. I just use third gear as I pass along through the fork.
Yes, my best friend has a couple of Indians, 1940s Indians. He's got a 42 Scout and a 47 Chief, and I've ridden both of those a lot, and both of those have three-speed transmissions, and again, very torquey V-twin motors, and they don't need more gears. It just adds to the complexity and adds to the hassle. They actually work extremely well. So I completely get your point. If you've got a motor that's producing 100 foot-pounds of torque, you don't need more than 3 speeds. You absolutely don't.
So why design them in there? Why add the complexity? Again, we're operating down here in New Orleans on first principles, which means rethinking everything.
Interesting. So moving on to, the chassis and the suspension, again, you've got some really interesting concepts in there.
Well, I got to give credit where it's due. The rear suspension, I basically stole that from Pierre Terreblanche. So there's a great Pablo Picasso quote, and that is that good artists copy, great artists steal. So tip of the hat to Pierre Terreblanche for that. What I did differently is I doubled up. So the rear suspension that he did for Guzzi back when they had those wonderful Moto Guzzi concepts, that was like 2008, 2007, something like that.
Right.
They had an all new rear suspension that he came up with, and it's really clever. The only problem is that the shock absorber is on the swing arm and becomes unsprung weight. So the problem with that design is that there's a lot of unsprung weight. But if you use air shocks and use 2 of them, that problem is solved.
Interesting. Okay. So what about the front suspension?
Also, all the same air shocks. There's actually, on the design we have on the books right now, we have 5 hydropneumatic shock absorbers, 1 on each girder blade, and there are 4 girder blades on the machine, and 1 under the seat to augment the leaf spring. So this motorcycle actually has rider suspension, dedicated rider suspension. Man, look, one of the lessons I learned from riding this shovelhead around, it's got the bear trap, that huge, ugly, horrible brown seat. It's wonderful. It is so comfortable. The only reason why you don't see bikes like that running around today is because it's so bloody ugly.
Yeah.
But when you're on it, oh man, it's a Rolls Royce quality ride. It's not a racing motorcycle. Again, we're not building a bike where you have to understand what's going on every second with your chassis. It's designed for comfort.
The thing that sort of is most striking about this motorcycle is just how gorgeous looking it is. So is that a case of form following function, or are you really, I mean, you are an artist. Are you really focusing on the looks of the bike as much as you are its abilities to work?
When we unloaded the Wraith out of the van so many years ago. And it scrambled your brain as much as it scrambled a lot of people's brains. I mean, it was a love it or hate it design. What I'm going after is if you're a real motorcycle guy, you take one look at this motorcycle and instantly you know exactly what it is. There's no explaining necessary. Now, I've done a lot of weird looking stuff over the past, and I'm ready to build one that immediately connects. So is it styled? Not really. The way that those bikes look, pre-war American four-cylinder motorcycles, is a function of their engineering. But having that in your back pocket so that a motorcycle guy just takes one look and says, got it. I know exactly what this is. You don't have to explain anything. It makes my job a lot easier.
I mean, it's jaw-droppingly beautiful. I mean, absolutely stunning.
Well, because it's classic. It's classic. There's nothing really intimidating about it. It's approachable.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But just it's gorgeous. I mean, just the level of detail. So I will definitely post the URL in the show notes so that people can go through to your website and have a look at this. The attention to detail is just astonishing.
Well, that's also a function of where it was built. I think that there's a through line, at least I hope, there's a through line for all the work that I've done that puts it in a place. In other words, if I say the word Italian sports car, that would conjure up images in your brain. You're already got one in your brain right now. You know what that is.
Yeah.
So in the overarching scheme and theme of my life, it's if I say the words New Orleans motorcycle, you will have an image just like Italian sports car. That's how you achieve real permanence, is designing from within a culture. It's a rejection of international design. This is not a crass commercial exercise. This is about legacy.
Right. So the name Magnolia, I mean, you are Bienville Studios. So where did the name Magnolia come from?
Well, some of your listeners may be aware I built a car called the Magnolia Special.
Okay.
That's also there in the journey section of the website that absorbs and reflects some of my culture. And being from Louisiana, knowing what a magnolia tree is, especially if you're a kid, climbing a tree, and you know when you're on a magnolia tree, it has a certain smell. So everybody in the South does have an experience with a magnolia, and it's such a great word. Just love it. It's part of our culture.
Again, and part of that Louisiana, New Orleans theme running through everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm designing from a very special place.
Yeah.
There's a great quote by Tennessee Williams. The quote is, America has three cities, New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Everywhere else is Cleveland. There's a lot of romance here, and a lot of it's very easy to design within this culture because there's so much here. All you have to do is walk around.
Yeah.
Go walk through the French Quarter with a sketchbook. You'll come back with everything that you need. So yeah, tapping into the energy of this place, tapping into the source of creativity. That's how you achieve permanence.
Yes, I agree. So what's the next step for the project? Are you sort of actively seeking financing, or are you sort of moving forward? I mean, where exactly are we at here, and what's the end goal?
Well, we're still in a design phase, and we'll be transitioning out of the design phase and into the prototype phase in the next month.
Oh, wow.
We're actually we're actually going to start making real parts in the next month. After that, who knows? Look, man, in many ways, this is an art project. And if all it ever becomes is an art project, that's okay, because that's what my training is in. I'm a fine arts major.
Interesting. Okay.
Look, man, we have a problem, a collective problem as motorcyclists. And that is that motorcycle culture has this forced egalitarianism, where if you can't buy the motorcycle for $10,000, it's blown off. Now, car culture doesn't have this problem. Car culture, when you look at a Pagani, you know what a Pagani automobile is.
Sure.
What goes through my mind when I'm sitting in a Pagani is, oh my God, how did he make it so cheap? It's a $3 million car.
Right.
There is in the automotive world, they're so much more mature than the motorcycle world. What they say is, they look at a Pagani and say, oh, that's one man's vision. Isn't it wonderful that it exists? It makes the world a more interesting place. And in the motorcycle world, we're kind of stuck in this world where people know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And we're in crisis mode right now. Part of the crisis mode, I think the big part, isn't that millennials aren't interested in motorcycling. It's that there aren't any interesting motorcycles.
I do take your point. I think that comes from, the birth of motorcycles was really as utilitarian transport. Obviously, the Japanese post-Second World War and so on. And even now in these, third world countries, where motorcycles are such a critical part of being able to move around, countries with very little infrastructure, inexpensive motorcycles are a great way for people to work and be able to move around. But having said that, I agree with you. I think there is very much room in the motorcycle public's consciousness for something that takes motorcycling to the artistic level and to another level.
Well, who is the Pagani of motorcycles?
Right. There you go.
I can't come up with it.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yes, I mean, for instance, I'm good friends with the chaps at Arch. Gard Hollinger and Keanu Reeves are producing some really interesting machines. And again, their attitude is very similar to yours. It's let's create something interesting rather than let's just create something utilitarian. And there's certainly a place for both in the market.
I have big respect for what they're doing at Arch, and big respect for what Matt is doing at Curtis.
Yes.
The problem is that our passion is called motorcycle. That's two words, motor and cycle. And if you're not building your own engine, you're only fulfilling half of the equation.
Yes, very interesting. Well, I have to say, I wish you well with the project. I would love to see it come to fruition, and we'll definitely have to have you back on when and if that happens. You've created some spectacular things to date. As shocked and surprised as I was when I first looked at the Wraith, I certainly saw its potential, and I believe the potential was achieved. I mean, I love the machine, and it culminated for me with standing on the Bonneville Salt Flats at dawn, listening to Amazing Grace while I was looking at this amazing machine. So I applaud you for doing this, and I wish you well in where it goes. Keep us informed.
Well, Arthur, I got to tell you, man, I'm having the time of my life. This is so much fun. This is such a great challenge. Building an EV was a huge challenge.
Sure.
Going back into ICE and picking up the things that have been forgotten. is even more of a wonderful, fun, invigorating challenge. I wake up every morning and can't wait to get to work because this is it. This is so much fun.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, JT, and we'll look forward to installment number 2 when it happens.
Yeah, well, we'll have something to show you this winter, and I'll reach out to you. And thank you so much, Arthur, for being such a great for being such a great asset to our shared passion. I really, really appreciate your work.
Thank you. Thank you.